Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Now, I'm pretty excited to be getting into what is an important topic, and today we're hoping to cut through some of the noise, maybe some of the concern and the hype around AI and the impact it's having on events, but also event planners. So I'm Nathan, I'm the event and community manager here at Guidebook. And personally, I'm very much trying to adopt AI as much as possible into my own workflows. And one thing I did early on was just put a daily note on my calendar to ask myself, is there anything that AI can help me with today? And it's amazing kind of how quick little things that you were doing, you can really start to optimize when you just think about it in small amounts each day. So for today's session, we really want to sort of get through the fluff. There is a lot of noise. And I know that people are already maybe a little bit worried that they're being left behind or they don't know where to start. So we're here to get some insights and takeaways really on the status of how you can and should be using AI to help with event management. We recently ran a survey of some of our customers at Guidebook, and one thing was clear that most people are dipping their toes into AI, but a lot of people are kind of unsure of the best ways to utilize it. And two of the main reasons that came up were people not having enough knowledge or time. So we want to do a quick little poll to start things off. So I'm just going to launch that. We'd love to hear from you all. So feel free to, yeah, that should be up on your screen now. So it'd be great to kind of get a sense of where you are at in your AI journey. Okay, interesting to see how some people are answering that. So as you can see, I'm not here to tackle this subject alone, and I'm really pleased to be joined by two early adopters and AI advocates. We're lucky to be joined by Richelle, the Senior Director of Global Events at Docebo, and Noah, the Head of Marketing and Operations and co-founder at Speak About AI. Richelle, I'm going to come to you first to introduce yourself and say hi, and then we'll pass it over to you, Noah.
Thanks, Nathan. Hey, everyone. I'm Richelle Westhafer. I lead the global events team at Docebo, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today because I'm joining this conversation as someone who's in the weeds and in the work with you all. I spend a lot of time in any given day trying to figure out how to make a small but mighty event marketing team deliver big, impactful event programs around the world. And before Docebo, I worked on events for some other big tech brands like Microsoft and Meta. So I'm no stranger to navigating massive technology shifts and transformation in our industry. I'm just really excited to dive into our chat today, talk all things AI, and figure out what's working and have some fun with it. So I'm coming to you all today from a little cottage on a lake in Northern Ontario, Canada. So if there's any fellow Canadians here on this webinar, special hello to you. And I'll turn it over to you, Noah.
Yeah, thank you, Rochelle. It's great to meet you guys. Great to be here as well. It's been awesome working with Nathan and everyone at Guidebook. Yeah, so a little bit of background on me. I can say I kind of grew up around AI. My dad is actually one of the co-founders of Siri, and the joke back in middle school and high school is that I was Siri's brother. But I've been an avid user of AI kind of since ChatGPT really came out back in 2022. And in the last year or so, I've really gotten to talk to a lot of different event professionals on the topic of AI, specifically because I run a speakers bureau specifically for experts in AI. So in addition to getting to work with really the top people who are building and talking about the technology, I've also been having conversations on the topic of what are the workflows that take a lot of time for event professionals and how can we optimize that using AI. And through that, launched a newsletter where I'm actively sharing custom GPTs, different tools and tips for how you can use AI more efficiently.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I'm very pleased to have you both here with me and kind of the different experiences that you're going to bring to this conversation. I'm excited to get into it. Before we do, I should have just said at the top as well, we are going to be doing Q&A. So if you have any questions, just use the little Q&A feature button at the bottom and put them in because at the end we'll have some time for that. So I want to kick things off at the top. We are inundated with a lot of information, whether that's LinkedIn, newsletters, wherever it is that you digest your industry news or even your personal news when it comes to AI. So to you both, Richelle, I'll come to you first. I'm just curious, what's the biggest AI misconception you're seeing within the event industries right now?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is around the way we throw around the term AI and like defaulting to thinking of AI as generative AI and just thinking like AI, ChatGPT, when really AI is not a single tool or a single capability. It really refers to such a broader range of categories of systems that are all designed and optimized to do different types of tasks, working with these large volumes of data. So if we expand that definition to include machine learning, natural language processing, of course, generative AI and large language models, we start to realize that these tools have been weaving their way into our lives and into our work for years in much more subtle ways. And it's really like now that we are all feeling this like huge burst of advancement, that's really becoming disruptive to the way that we live and we work. But yeah, important to understand there's different types of AI that do different things, and keeping that wider lens when we're using the term. And then I think another one is just really the misconception that anybody right now is leading the pack, doing it right, has all the answers while we're in the midst of this seismic shift. And Noah, you actually had a really good analogy for this that I think you should share.
Yeah, I think the stage we're in right now is very similar to the dot-com bubble back in the late 90s and then of course 2000. And that environment where people felt like, of course, the internet's the next thing, which now with hindsight, we know the internet really did make a lot of changes. It created a lot of businesses and a crazy amount of technological progress. But at the same time, most of the companies that came out in the dot-com bubble failed. There ended up being this big burst. And we saw companies like eBay and Amazon come out of that. But at the same time, like if you think back to what we were doing on the internet 20 years ago compared to, or 25 years ago compared to what we're doing now, it feels very, very elementary. And most of the stuff and ways we use the internet then didn't exist, like don't exist anymore. The ways we use it now didn't exist then. So you don't need to feel like you're too late. It's like getting on the internet back then. So there's still so much progress to happen and so much to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the exciting thing with that as well is the pace of what things are happening and changing now as well. So yeah, it's really an exciting time. And I'm curious as well for both of you, like linking this back to event professionals, where do you see most event professionals today on their AI journey? And we can sort of have a look at our poll here as well.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if it's the way I've got my view set up, but I don't see the results of the poll. So Nathan, where did we land?
Yeah, so 4% of people are AI. I'm scared, holding it at arm's length for now. We've got 43% of people are dipping their toes in, definitely still a rookie. Then 38% are using it here and there and getting the hang of it. And then we've got 14% who can't live without it, and AI is basically their coworker.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say. I think it's clear that we are still at the beginning. We're learning, we're experimenting, which is all really great at this foundational stage. But I think one thing I would call out, is that in addition to understanding the many benefits of working with AI, it's also important to understand the limitations, right? Like really understanding how answers are generated so that we're able to start being discerning and looking for things like hallucinations or why that result might have been generated, as well as understanding some of the risks and ethical responsibilities that we all have when using these tools. So thinking about data use, bias that can creep its way in. I saw today on LinkedIn something that really resonated with me. It was talking about delegation and using AI and thinking of AI as your new, very talented intern, right? So they bring a ton of value and talent to the table that can really help you, but you're responsible for guiding them or the AI and teaching it and delegating it in a reasonable way. And then, of course, oversight ultimately of what that intern would be doing. So yes, we're at the beginning. We should be working with these principles as we are working our way through experimenting, exploring, and implementing into our work.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Because I think a lot of people think AI is coming for their job, but actually, that analogy of the intern is like these are tools that can help you in your job, expand your job, and maybe not just get things done faster, but give you the opportunity to maybe do some of the higher level stuff as well. So it's a pretty Yeah, pretty amazing time. And I want to sort of think about integration with events and AI. And Richelle, I know you've got some great experience here, and I really want to sort of ask you, like, how should event professionals be thinking about AI as a strategic differentiator, not just an efficiency tool, which I think is what, we do get a little bit caught up in.
Yeah. So I think right now we can momentarily, temporarily, for another hot minute, call it a differentiator because those that are starting to embrace AI are being naturally curious, open to disrupting the way that we've all done things for a really long time. So not only are we becoming more efficient workers in some of our day-to-day routine stuff, which is great, but starting to emerge as more strategic leaders because we're freeing ourselves up to think about not just AI doing the work, but articulating the value of the work and the events and the programs that we're all doing. And I think a big part of this is also through how we connect to the teams and maybe cross-functional partners around us and the tools that they're using. So chances are your sales teams, customer teams, like they are all also experimenting and starting to integrate AI tools into their work. So it's really important that we understand what they're all doing and what that means to the work that we're doing, and that we're not just like using it in a bubble. And then I think the second way is really using AI to enhance the attendee experience throughout the life cycle of an event, pre, during, and post. And we're going to get a lot more specific about some ways and some things that that might look like in our time together today, because Noah's got some really cool stuff to share. But one thing I would impress upon all of us is that no matter where you are on your AI adoption journey, we can't think of AI as something like take it or leave it or like do it or don't do it, um, because it's already embedded into most of the tools that we're all using, and the capabilities are advancing and getting better by the day. So the working world as we know it, events or otherwise for everyone, has changed. So going back to the original question, I think we can call it a bit of a differentiator for now, but we really are at that juncture where we need to acknowledge that it really is the standard and the new norm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you raise a few good points there, and I'm excited to, yeah, as we go through this conversation, get into some of the operational stuff. But kind of coming back to the poll where people are dipping their toes in, and I think it's important, maybe at this point, just what are some of the mistakes that maybe you've seen event professionals making that people could avoid when they're trying to like start to do more or start to use tools differently? Is there anything that jumps out to you that you'd recommend people maybe don't do?
Yes. Okay. So one mistake that I've made, and I think others may have experienced this as well, is trying to use AI as a magic wand to solve their biggest, most important problems. And I'd actually recommend flipping that and like taking the opposite approach and looking for some easy wins. So think about your week, think about what you do in any given day or any given week, and look at some of the most time consuming or repetitive tasks and start to look for some efficiencies there so that you're actually gradually building up your own skills in working with these tools. Because AI is not going to just swoop in and be the answer. It takes practice on your part to iterate and understand what works and where you're going to start to bump up against some of those limitations of the tools before you start getting some really great results. So again, like thinking of that intern analogy, you're probably not going to like throw the intern your most important, highly visible strategic task. You would use them to help you get through your work quicker so that you can focus on that more strategic, highly valuable task, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I think this is a good time to Noah to come to you, because I know that you've been showing a lot of useful ways in which people can utilize AI and improve some of those efficiencies. And I'm kind of just curious, like, what are some of the best things you've discovered with utilizing AI within that kind of operational efficiency bucket?
Yeah, I love Rochelle's analogy of an intern. I think that's like, think of bringing in AI kind of as hiring more people in your team. What I've been hearing like from countless event professionals is that their companies don't have the resources or don't want to commit the resources to hiring more people, They don't want to give them the resources they necessarily need to put on the event that they really want to do. I see AI as kind of a way to bridge that and be able to do more and have more leverage than without having to bring on kind of an additional team member. So I think there's so much value on that front. And one point I'll bring in with AI as well, the biggest mistake I see people make is really forgetting to add the context that they need, which bringing it back to that kind of intern analogy, imagine you bring in an intern and you don't tell them how to do the job whatsoever. They're coming in and they have no clue what the job looks like at all. But if you're able to give them training after they've done it a few times, after they've been onboarded, they're going to have some sense. The idea of providing context to AI is almost magical because with an intern, it takes them 6 months to learn that, and then they're gone by the time that they actually know what they're doing. Versus with AI, you give them the documents and they instantly know it, which is unbelievable. So imagine having an intern that you can train instantly versus having to bring someone in to learn for 6 months. So there's a ton of value on that side. I agree, especially with Richelle on the strategic side of things. You don't want it making strategic decisions. I think it's great sometimes to have a sounding board of, hey, here are my strategic ideas. What do you think? And it's not always going to be right. You're still making the final shot. But oftentimes, you're not going to have a counterpart in your role, whatever company you're at. You're not going to have somebody that you can really talk to and like get your thoughts out there and have them really take the time to listen and try and understand. So I think that's a great strategic use case of it. But I think a lot of the value does come from those lower leverage tasks. So those tasks that take you a ton of time that as the strategic person, really like take your time away from what matters, dealing with fires, putting out fires, um, focusing on making your event higher quality than it was last year. And things like that can look like creating your run of show, like having to create a work back plan. These are things that typically have to be done manually because if there are details that are wrong, everything can crash and burn. So you have to be the person who's going through this spreadsheet and making sure everything's accurate. But if you can save yourself a little bit of time, give it the direction and have it update it for you, and then you're the person giving the check versus having to fill in every box or write the document yourself, it'll save you a ton of time that you can then focus on the things that are more important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thinking about saving some of that time, I don't know, people Noah's got a really fast growing newsletter, and this is how I came across Noah. And I'm going to share it anyway as we follow up with you afterwards. But I really recommend subscribing, and because he is sharing some really good actionable tips every week around AI and how to use it. But I'm kind of just interested in some of the key prompts that you've discovered, shared, whatever, to help event planners. So I have two questions. Firstly, just like how are you deciding what efficiencies to even focus on right now with AI?
Yeah, so originally, and I would say even now, it's through a lot of conversations. Once again, I'm not necessarily an event professional by trade. I'm new to the industry. I'm not going to come in here and act like I know how to do a job I haven't done for 10 years. Every event professional I talk to, I feel like you're a rookie if you've been in the industry for 10 years. So I've been lucky enough to have great conversations with people like the head of events at Taco Bell, with Richelle, who's shared a lot of amazing knowledge with me as well. And getting to ask them, hey, what really takes your time away from the stuff that you want to do? What are the pieces of your job that you really don't enjoy? What's the stuff that feels like you're wasting your day? Because I think as an event professional, there's so many amazing reasons to love the job, but there are also all of these things that just feel like banging your head against a wall and that there has to be a better way. I would say a great tactical example of that is rooming lists. I got to talk to someone who worked at conference or works at Conference Direct, and his process of having to get 700 attendees for an event and then be able to place them between 12 different hotels based on their seniority, based on their dietary preferences, based on their accessibility. And of course, that all has to be done by hand. So that's him spending 6 to 8 hours having to put all of this in. And then someone might get back to him and say, hey, actually, this entire group of people has changed. Then he has to start again. And that's just time that he's burning. And he doesn't go to work and necessarily look forward to doing that every day. He doesn't want to spend 8 hours filling out this rooming list. So I went through and basically just bashed my head against a wall using AI, seeing how much of this can it actually do. Because as Rochelle talked about, it's not this magic wand. You're not going to put it in AI and then AI is magically going to figure it out and give you exactly what you want. You are going to kind of face these barriers. We've made a lot of progress in the last, I would say, 3 years since it really came out. Before, you could put in 1 page of context and then you could get maybe half a page out that's still really general, sounds like AI isn't fantastic. Versus now you can give it 40, 50 pages of context. You can generate 2 to 3 pages if they're not too long. Like the amount and scale of things that it can process is much, much better than it was 3 years ago, even if people don't necessarily recognize that. And it's only going to get much better, but there are still walls that we're up against. The technology isn't necessarily what it needs to be unless you're going to be using some creative engineering and some programming on the back end, which I don't think most people at this stage want to do, especially if you have a full-time job and are dealing with event planning. Like that's a really big ask for you to have to teach this all to yourself. But on the accessibility side, I think there's real opportunity for you to get a task kind of 30 to 40% of the way done. I would put kind of rooming lists in that category. Like I think it's something where you can do it using AI and you're going to save some time for sure. Is it going to feel painless? No, you're going to have to put in 25 names at a time to get them in the format that you want. It's not going to be like you put in the entire list and it spits it out perfectly for you. And after, if you put in more than 25, then the entire thing breaks and doesn't give you accuracy. So like you have to really find these limits. And that's what I've been spending my time doing, figuring out like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 0 to 10. 0 is we don't want AI to touch this at all. We want humans doing this forever. 1 is like, hey, we probably don't want to do this, but AI is terrible and AI can't do it really well. To 10 being, hey, you can basically like put your hands up, type one thing and have it put it out, like create it perfectly just using ChatGPT with a $20 subscription. I think most tasks are really going to fall in that 3 to 8 category. I don't think it's perfect. Another one Richelle and I have talked about, I'd say relatively extensively, is doing venue layouts, specifically for when you're trying to create a venue layout for an event that's coming up. Of course, you're going to need that specific venue's AV setup. You're going to need to figure out where do you put the stage, where do you put the chairs, where do you put the speakers. Trying to arrange all of this is typically something you have to do just within a graphic design tool, whether it's Canva, whether it's Photoshop, something else like that. That takes a lot of time. And it would be so much better if you could just do it all through text and be able to say, hey, I want the stage to be here. I want this to be there. But unfortunately, it's not there yet. I would give it like a 2 out of 10 right now for trying to do that task. So I would say if it's a 2 out of 10, don't touch it. It's not worth trying to make it work. Save your time for other things, continue to do it manually. And then hopefully at some point in the future, in the next 2, 3 years, that's going to work better. A piece of that, I would say that the reason why it doesn't work well for that specific task is the data and the context on the back end. So of course, you're going to have this large context or amount of data that's been fed into the LLM or the AI agent. And through that data, that really defines what it's good at. And that's why context is super important in you putting in context, because it's not going to be good at event tasks if you aren't able to give it a ton of information on what do you want it specifically to do. It's kind of the same, but on the back end that you don't get to see, that's all their proprietary knowledge. And from what I've found, just playing around with it, if you were to try this for event layouts, they probably don't have the specific venues layout. So they're not going to be able to use that. You're going to end up getting this generic square box for every single event that you try. And it's going to have random circles just because they don't have a ton of information on what does a good venue layout look like. Versus if you try it for a 1 bedroom apartment, it's actually quite good. Like there's so much data on like what does a 1 bedroom apartment look like online that it does a really good job of being able to create. If you're like, hey, I want a 1,000-foot 1 bedroom apartment with in-room laundry, in-room washer, and 2 bathrooms and a common space that's this big. It's going to do a pretty good job of creating that, but that's just because it has the context and the data. And it's like, oh, I've seen a million different 1 bedroom apartment layouts, so I know what that looks like. So that's really like just a little bit of insight on the testing end, what's going to work, what's not going to work. But I would say every task kind of falls in that spectrum of probably 1 to 8 right now.
Yeah, okay, that's really useful to know. And I feel like at this point, I think it'd be nice if we can maybe help the audience visualize some of this and what this looks like. So Noah, I'm gonna put you on the spot and just see if you could walk us through a specific workflow transformation you used, tested, and yeah, just kind of explain what it is and how it works.
Yeah, would love to. I'll jump into that right now after I share my screen. But just to give a bit of kind of context on what I'm going to be walking through here is I'm going to be showing kind of the event timeline generator that I ended up making that actually kind of went viral on LinkedIn, ended up having 1,500 event professionals asking me for it. I've gotten a lot of fantastic feedback on it. Also, I've gotten to test it a lot more myself and get a really good sense of what can it actually be used for. Once again, what are the limitations and where does it fall kind of on the spectrum that I've talked about. And I'll be sharing that kind of as we walk through, and you'll get a sense of it yourself of like, how does this ranking system matter? So to really give like an overview, the goal with this is to really be able to generate an event timeline, a very high level timeline. Say you have an event coming up, you just got the details, or you're trying to come up with all the details and put them in one place in a very initial brief. So we can start out, and it already has these prompts kind of loaded in. So we have, I need a timeline for an upcoming event. I can just click that and it's automatically going to start. And through this, I basically have given it all this different context on the back end on kind of industry best practices, along with what I've found on research for creating timelines. So to start, it knows to ask me all these different questions. So versus me having to go in and know exactly what I have to put in, it's already going to do that for you. And I'll show this link after so you guys can test it out yourself. But the nice part is you don't have to do a ton of prompting. You don't have to do a ton of thinking for this. Like, it's going to tell you what you need, and you just have to answer its questions, and then it's going to give you the output. So for this, we have the event date. We have what's today's date, so it can have a countdown as well and be able to say week by week, this is what we need to get done. Scale and scope, expected attendance, quick complexity assessment. So I'm actually going to try and use the voice tool here, which takes a little bit to load. But this is how I prefer to use ChatGPT. So ideally, as you can see now, it's recording me. But ideally, with ChatGPT, you really, really want to make sure that you're saving as much time as possible. It's easier to talk than it is to type. I'm sure you guys are used to being on meetings as well, where you have to tell someone this already. So that's why I really like using this voice function. That's why I love ChatGPT. So just I'll jump into it now and kind of give it the prompt, you could say. But ChatGPT, ignore everything I just said. Only go from this point forward. So walking through the event details, we're going to have an event on September 15th. Today's date is July 11th, or sorry, 17th. And what type of event is it? It's going to be a conference. We're trying to have around 300 to 500 people. It's going to be held at a large convention room. So we're going to want to have room for about 300 to 500 people in that convention room. We're going to have one location. It's just going to be from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. For AV production, we're really going to need a main camera, a photographer, and then a videographer to walk around and get secondary clips. We're only going to be doing kind of heavy appetizers, no sit-down meal. And then we want to have 4 speakers doing 10-minute lightning sessions and then a 30-minute Q&A. So off of this, I'm just going to hit the check mark. And from there, it should take that entire transcript. It's going to transcribe it for me. Great. So we already have this written out. And all I have to do is hit the send button. So as you can see, I didn't have to write anything. I didn't have to work on how do I want to frame this. And it's already going into it. Okay, so we have the initial information. We have the event date. We have today's date. We have type of event, attendees, venue, event time. And the other way to do this, you don't have to do it through voice. If you already have a document or something like that, you can just upload the document and be like, hey, here's all the information that I need. Great, so it already has all of this. It's giving me complexity rankings. And then from there, it's now going to generate the timeline. And something that also happens is typically it'll actually ask you follow-up questions. If it feels like it doesn't have enough information, it's going to be like, hey, here's a second round of other details that I think I need to go forward with this. And all right, it's giving me a few different options here: executive summary timeline, comprehensive working timeline, risk-focused timeline. So let's go with an executive summary. And from here, it's going to work on generating that. A few notes just on these different ones. One of the limitations I've found with, once again, a $20 ChatGPT subscription and kind of where things are at right now is it only can handle so much context, and it can only give you a certain amount of information at a time. So it's not going to be able to generate 30 pages for you. I know a lot of event briefs for super complex events are going to be 20, 30 pages at least. So that's something you really have to keep in mind. If you're creating an external plan or a very initial plan, it's great. But if you're trying to break it down per member on your team, it's not going to be able to do it all at once. Kind of as I talked about before with the rooming lists, you're going to have to figure out where is that balance, like how far can it get? And then you have to work within the restrictions you have. And this is going to get better as the technology gets better. But it's really about building the habits and building the ability to use it now in these different ways. All right, great. So we already have this venue, large convention room, heavy appetizers, basic AV plus roaming plus videographer, or roaming videographer and photographer. Kind of phase 1. So this is the first real next week of different things that we need to accomplish. So we have confirmed venue, lock event concept, name and run of show outline, send speaker invitations and collect bio/topics, begin vendor outreach. So it's really already giving me a breakdown based on the industry standards that I put in before. And once again, it's really easy for you to make something like this yourself. Once again, I know that not every event is going to have the same timelines, have the same kind of industry standard ways of doing things. I've had plenty of planners talk to me about that. This is really just to give you a basic sense, but you can always put in your own stuff. Like if you have tons of documents and you have a way of doing things that you know these deadlines need to be met at this time for the event to work based on all of the events you've had in the past, make your own custom GPT, put all of that in, and then it'll be able to go off of what you've seen work in the past and the data that you have, which I think is the best way to do it. This is really just how do you get a starting point? How do you get started using it? And just get a sense of like what AI is capable of. So here it's already talking about contracts and program build. And then here it's also talking about finalization and execution. So it broke it into 3 phases for me. Is giving me specific dates for when I need to get things done and what the milestone is, and then additional notes as well. And then it's also identifying some risk triggers. So speaker dropout deadline, September 1st, if someone fails, making sure that I have a backup speaker list. So it does a really good job of actually identifying some of these key risks as well, which is something I've included in the prompt. And then it gives me a few different options here. So PDF, Gantt chart, or editable checklist format. So from what I found, PDF is okay. It's not fantastic. Gantt chart is once again a little bit questionable. I think getting any output in text is going to be your best bet right now. So it's great at going text to text. If it goes text to spreadsheet, it basically does that through coding. So that's one of the reasons why I found that the spreadsheet outputs aren't necessarily the best formatted. They sometimes are missing details. If you really want it to be the most comprehensive, stick to text. And then unfortunately, we're still at the stage that we have to move it from text specifically over to putting it in a spreadsheet manually. The biggest thing that I'm waiting for on the AI front that I think is going to be a game changer for event professionals is when we have editable spreadsheets through AI. So I think Google is going to be one of the like potential leaders in the future. I think everyone's going to have to switch over to Google. I mean, I think Microsoft is going to try and catch up as well. But ideally, having an AI tool like this, like Gemini, that you can actively collaborate with your spreadsheets. Because who wants to actually learn how to manipulate a spreadsheet? If you can just do it through natural language, it's going to be so much better. I see that as almost like the next programming language that's going to die. Everyone talks about how you don't need to code anymore and you can do vibe coding and all these things. I think spreadsheets is going to be unbelievable. I think we're going to have to we're going to basically potentially give up on having to learn how to manipulate things in spreadsheets because we can do everything via text. That's kind of my dream. I think we're still a few years off, but I've heard that companies internally who are working on these tools are already using them in some capacity. So I'm super excited about that. But once again, with this tool, I think it's still one of the weaker outputs. I think getting it in text is really the best way to do it. Just kind of talking about it on a high level, I would give this kind of a 7 or 8 out of 10. I think it's a great starting point. Once again, it's not going to do the entire thing for you. If you want to do something that's more in depth, you have to break it out chunk by chunk. So it's not a 10 because, of course, you can't just go through this and get a super, super comprehensive event brief. But I think it's a great starting point. And with a few different rounds of revisions, you can really get through and get something that's super usable.
I have a quick build on this, Noah, because as you said, this is an amazing starting point. You can immediately see how this gets you, you know, part way through some of that really cumbersome early planning really, really quickly. But it's reminding me of something I touched on earlier, which is like connecting then into other teams that impact the work that you're doing. So I'm imagining that taking something like this, once you've refined it a little bit, and if you're in the fortunate position where maybe you have a broader marketing team that includes creative folks, and maybe they're working with a more robust project management tool like Asana, imagine taking the output of this, doing that kickoff so everyone understands some of those big milestones, and then being able to populate Asana or whatever project management tool you use with these milestones. And now everybody's on the same page and able to take their tasks and take their part of the work and go from there. So this is a really, really great use.
The great part about it as well is, as everyone knows, you create this initial plan and it almost never goes to the initial plan that you create. And that means that when something comes up, whether it's an executive sharing their opinion on something, hey, we need it done by this date, whether it's a stakeholder or a vendor falling through and you having to adjust timelines, it means you have to go back into the spreadsheet and you have to manually look at everything and then think through it. Okay, how is this going to adjust every little piece of our timeline based on this one thing changing? With AI, I think that's so much easier. You can now go in and you can say, hey, this is what it's changed. Now present a new timeline for me with all of these different pieces um, on like now change with those factors that have become different, whether it's the executive, whether it's a vendor falling out or falling through. Uh, that's such a something that before is going to take you another 2 hours and is going to be the thing that you have to stay up late at night making sure that you get done because it's essential. Now hopefully you can reduce those 2 hours or whatever it is to being 10-15 minutes of you working with this and then finally getting a quicker output. So I think that's one of the best use cases of it as well, beyond just generating the timeline, making sure that you're going back and as you revise it, using AI to revise and keeping everything within one chat. Because then like you can look back at the entire chat, you can even copy the entire chat history, and you can see you have a basically a transcript of how has the timeline changed from your very first time putting it in and like, okay, what did the scope look like to now what is the scope at the end when you actually have everything executed? And having that data and really understanding even for next time, hey, like these are some features that like or things that we need to prepare for that we've seen happen 2 or 3 times before. Maybe we should change the scope initially or give it different prompting instructions to make sure that we're able to account for this vendor falling through that typically falls through. So next time you're prepared for it, you're able to hop on a little bit quicker than you would otherwise because you've kind of identified that as an opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And Noah, someone asked as you were presenting this, are you able to share the initial prompt that you used with ChatGPT at the very beginning? Is that something that you can just give us a glimpse of?
Yeah, happy to kind of walk through my setup and how I set this up and the background on it. So of course we have the name and description here, and then we also have the prompt, which I'm happy to share to everyone who's attended. I can send it to you, Nathan, and you can share it with everyone after. And like it goes through just a super brief breakdown because of course it's pretty in depth. Um, it has all these different limitations, so making sure that it can't access real-time vendor availability or pricing, can't verify actual venue availability. So really putting in these limitations of what it can and cannot do, which I think is super, super important, especially if you're sharing things with your teams. One example is you can kind of make an AI twin of your event and put in all of your information as I kind of talked about and have something that changes as your event changes. And then even share with your teammates and give them the link to the custom GPT and have them be able to ask questions. So if they're not up to date on what's happening, they can be briefed without you having to send them a Slack message. But when you're doing that, of course, you really need to make sure you're giving them accurate information. And the best way that you can ensure that is adding in your own guardrails to the prompt and making sure that if this information isn't specifically stated in the knowledge or the documents that I provided, give them an error message. And that's the best way that you can protect yourself from sharing false information. Of course, I don't expect it to be perfect. Make sure you're not using it for really high important strategic things, but setting that line of if it's a basic question of what are the goals of the event or what's the status of this vendor, etc. I think it's a great use case of just making sure that information can be spread without you having to spend all day in Slack. So that's really my piece on the limitations here. Going through, looking at other different pieces, I added the conversation starters, really adding in the key initial questions of what should we be asking people. So of course, event date, today's date, event type. That's really what's important. And then having kind of the prompting walkthrough of what questions do we need in order to get started and have them create something that's usable the first time. Because once again, like you don't want to spend all this time prompting if you don't have to. So that's really the goal here is saving people time having to go back and forth and just get something usable in 2 or 3 questions. Then just going down because I want to make sure we get through everything, get to some questions. We have the conversation starters, the knowledge base that I was talking about. So we have kind of a presentation on planning timeline best practices. We have MBECS standards, more general information from doing research on what does it take to create a great event timeline from online, and then a sample of what does an event timeline as a spreadsheet look like. So those are all 4 resources I've added. Of course, nothing specific to my event, but if you're to make this for yourself, you can put in all event information that you might have or past information as well. So say you're doing an annual summit and you had an annual summit last year, you can put in all of your information from the annual summit. So it has context going in on who you are, what you do, and the types of events you've held in the past. Recommended model, it doesn't really matter what model you're using. Capabilities, I have it on web search. So in case you want to try and do some research within it, I have that turned on. Canvas, That one's not as important, but I leave it checked. Image generation for timelines, you're not typically going to be generating images. So I had that turned off. And then code interpreter, which is super important. Once again, if you want to analyze spreadsheets, that's the way that you allow to analyze spreadsheets. And then the most important setting I would say is making sure that conversation data is turned off here. So this is the way that I would say they get you is if you have a free account, if you have this turned on, it means that they're using your data and using it to train into their system. I talked about kind of the black box of information that they have. This is where they can take your information and put it into their black box. So this is how your client information would end up in their training models where someone can ask a question and find your client information. So make sure that this is turned off at all times. Once again, the danger of having a free account is they're going to be training on your data. That's kind of the trade-off. They're like, hey, we'll give you this for free. But at the same time, because we're giving it to you for free, you're basically giving us your data in return. So that's why I highly recommend just buying the $20 subscription account, especially if you're using this for anything work related. You need a $20 subscription account minimum at least. But if you're making custom GPTs, especially used by your team, you really, really need to make sure that you go into additional settings and you uncheck this and you make sure that's not checked. But yeah, that's kind of an overview just on the back end of how everything works.
That's great. Thank you, Noah. Thank you for running
Yeah.
us through that. And yeah, we'll be sharing all of this information afterwards so people can access that. And Richelle, I wanted to come back to you, and I wanted to, we've seen how to utilize some of this stuff, and we've talked about it at a bit of a, surface, sort of a top level. But I'm kind of, from your kind of experience of getting into AI, like how should someone with limited experience start building these capabilities within their organization?
Um, that's a great question. I think if we think about AI adoption on a really simple spectrum, ranging from that awareness and exploration all the way up to fully integrating it and optimizing the way you work. Um, I would go back to the very beginning. I know this might sound really obvious, but if you have limited experience or exposure, start with the fundamentals. Like actually find yourself some self-serve training. I know OpenAI has a free AI Academy. You could even ask Gemini to like generate a beginner's guide for you, but taking a minute to understand the different types of tools and how they work so that you could start to work your way up to some of the stuff that Noah just showed you, and kind of advance from there. I think if you are an individual contributor, meaning you're on a team or you work as an individual, but you're not managing people, going back to what you said at the very beginning, Nathan, which is kind of hilarious that you prompt yourself with a post-it note, which is like the most analog way to remind yourself of something, to remind yourself to use AI. But asking yourself within your daily work, what is the most time-consuming thing that we can do? Not the most important task. Choose a tool, start practicing. But then if you are a people manager, you want to do all of the above. And it's also your responsibility to start setting the tone for your team of this new way of working. So encouraging curiosity, experimentation, failure, enabling your team on those basics is really important. So it's not enough to just tell your team, you are empowered, go use AI. You should be able to actually guide them on some specific uses, how to prompt really well to start getting some results that actually make a difference in their work. So an example that comes to mind that I made the mistake of recently was I was telling a team member, we were working our way through the first round of revision of review on a pretty complex venue contract. And I said, oh my gosh, we've got the contract. Great. Throw it in AI and like give it a first scrub. And they kind of just looked at me like, what? And I was like, sorry, wait a minute. What I'm actually trying to say is take this contract, take a recent contract that's already been approved by our legal team and it's already made all the changes and implemented all of our specific asks, put them both into a tool. And then I kind of gave her more guidance on like how to prompt, what to ask for, and tell the tool what we wanted it to do, which was essentially act as like our first round of legal review before we brought it to our actual legal team. So being able to have that fluency in understanding it yourself so that you can properly guide your team is really important. And I would just add that I think the way you work is the better measure of success than like the number of new tools. So don't get bogged down with all of the different tools that are out there now. Like that can almost get counterproductive. Don't forget to talk to the teams around you, understand what they're also using and experimenting with, and look for like overlap. So that like if your sales teams are using some really cool thing that's going to better give them sales intel, you might want to use that to influence some of your pre-event strategy rather than like going and sourcing your own tool for account intel or something like that. So those are some of the things that I would start with as you're looking at bringing that out to yourself and to your teams.
Yeah, Rochelle, I would love to jump in and add. I loved your point specifically on, as a manager, how do you talk to your teams about using AI and how do you be specific instead of saying, hey, just jump on this and scrub the contract? I think the way that you approach AI should be similar in that way of being a manager. Like when you're going to an AI, you can't just be like, scrub this, like scrub the contract using AI or just scrub the contract. You have to be very, very specific and give actionable feedback. I think that's a big point. If AI, say, gives you a response that you're not happy with, ask yourself, why are you not happy with that response, and figure out the specific things that are making it bad. Rather than being like, hey, this is terrible, do it again. Be like, hey, I noticed that this is incorrect or that is incorrect. Please fix this, or it should look like this. And those are the ways that you're actually going to get the output you want versus kind of giving up and saying, hey, it's bad, do it again. The more specific you can be, the more actionable you can be, the better a response you're going to get, whether it's a person or whether it's AI.
Yeah, I love that. And I know we're almost up on time and we've got a few questions. And if people still have questions, do feel free to send them in. So I want to give time to that. So before we do, just quickly, what's one AI trend development that you're excited about that maybe people aren't thinking or talking about just yet? So no, we'll come to you quickly first, and then we can get to Richelle and some Q&A.
Yeah, for me, I think it's really the Google ecosystem. I currently, to be honest, I actually don't use ChatGPT personally that much. I use Claude for most of my workflows. I just find that ChatGPT is the most widely common one, so I want to make sure I'm using the tool that's really accessible for most people. And I think it's great. Like I think if you're 99% of people, ChatGPT is a great option. I think it doesn't really matter at this stage what tool you're using. Lori, I see that you mentioned that you only use Copilot. Like all of the stuff that I talked about today, I'm sure you could do the exact same in Copilot. It doesn't really matter what tool you're using, and make sure that you do stay within whatever your company uses. You're going to be able to get a very similar output. And I would say the Google ecosystem is really what I'm looking forward to. As I mentioned with spreadsheets, one of the biggest pieces of, or problems I would say we see in AI today is that it doesn't have the integrations that we want. And to get the integrations we want, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of trial and error, a lot of learning. I'm sure you guys have heard about AI agents. I'm working on building agents myself. It's not a fun process. It's not easy. It's not like you click this button and they magically work. You have to like use webhooks and like test every step and make sure that it doesn't break. And if any changes happen, like your entire thing could collapse and then you have to troubleshoot it and do it again. Versus I just want the Google ecosystem to have an agent builder where I just say, oh, connect to my spreadsheets, connect to my Google Docs, connect to Gemini, and then I can build everything in like 5 clicks using all of the things that they connect to automatically, where I don't have to worry about troubleshooting. I don't have to worry about webhooks, and it's like super easy and beginner friendly. I think we're going to get there. We're not there yet, but that's what I'm most excited for right now.
Okay, so mine is actually one that Noah, you touched on earlier because I was showing you my terrible experimentation and crappy results. But I am most excited for when we start to see an improvement in the way AI can help us better plan and visualize our venues and our physical spaces. So in a dream world, we'd be able to take a venue's 3D floor plan, maybe upload some event creative, indicate the type of layout that we think we want and the number of attendees, and then generate some really decent renderings. I'm like such a visual person. I hate waiting on like 3 different things to happen and then wait for a professional producer or designer to like get some renderings. So the bonus would be to be able to then move things around like a little dollhouse and start to figure out just the right setup that you want. It's really cumbersome still right now and probably still a ways away, but my hope is that things come together soon and we'll be able to have a lot more power back in our hands as the planners and be just a little bit less reliant on some of those other third parties to start to visualize what we want within an event space.
I love that. Thank you both. And now, yeah, we've got some good questions coming in, so I'm gonna open them up, and yeah, if either of you want to jump in, but I'm gonna start with a question from Amy, who just said, "Do you have any suggestions on what to do with data? They have a lot of registration data, all with demographic questions they ask during registration. Are there any good AI tools to create charts or graphs and present further insights with their registration data that maybe their marketing team can utilize, and things like that?"
I have an answer here, and then I'm sure Noah might have something to add. But my answer is kind of like almost any tool. So I experiment with a lot of our registration data. I always default to ChatGPT. That's just kind of like my comfort zone. But I would say as long as you're removing any personally identifiable information, so that now you've just got aggregate anonymous crowd data, you would be surprised if you upload a spreadsheet and then there's probably going to be some obvious ones that you're asking for that you specifically want to know, and it will generate charts, graphs, etc. It'll also start to ask you maybe some different angles that you hadn't thought of, or you can ask it, "Hey, what insights can you draw from these different data points?" And that's kind of where you can start to have some fun and shift from really formal prompting to almost conversational prompting and start to see what comes out of the data and looking for like those interesting intersections between that attendee data. And then I straight up take some of those charts and graphs, throw them into a deck. Those become part of my debriefs, my executive summaries. Depending on who I'm talking to, there might be different insights that pertain to different groups, but you should be able to get some really great results from any of the readily available tools that exist right now. That's a great easy, one of those like easy win ways to start experimenting.
Yeah, I have to agree with Rochelle. I think, I mean, we talked about it before a little bit, but I think that's like a 9 out of 10 application right now. I think it's really, really good, especially for visualization and being able to crunch a ton of data. I think the biggest differentiator from what we've seen in the past is now you can actually do that with qualitative data. Before you could only ever look at the numbers. Now you can try and take whatever it is, all of your surveys or as many of your surveys as you can put in, and then you can ask, what are the general trends that you're seeing between all of these different surveys via text. And that's not something we've been able to do before. So we're actually going to get to a point, I think, where we're able to kind of merge qualitative and quantitative data at scale. I think if you can get kind of creative with the engineering on the back end, if you have someone more technical on your team, I think that's something that's very, very reasonable, that if you can build a database and you kind of hook it up to an AI API, you can get a lot more information at scale. But I think even once again, within ChatGPT, within Claude, within whatever kind of general AI platform you use, you're going to be able to do something that's still very, very good.
Yeah, and there's a few questions here that are kind of, I think, leaning towards a similar theme around security. How secure is it utilizing these tools, sharing data, sharing rooming lists, etc. And I guess maybe hard for you both to, we don't work for these tools, but from your perspective, like how secure are they? And is there any data you absolutely wouldn't share with AI tools?
I can speak to this like through the lens of the way my company is approaching it. So obviously, right off the hop, you do not want to be sharing any, again, personally identifiable information. Same way that we all work with data, even just in like a spreadsheet or sending it back and forth by email. But then the added layer, if you do like whatever company you work for, you're going to want to make sure that you are not sharing anything proprietary. You kind of need to think of it through the lens of like what is the product development team, like what's confidential, what is not readily available for the public to know yet. You don't want to be sharing things that aren't ready to be out in the wild. So those are like some of the guiding principles. But if you are unsure, I think I saw this in another one of the questions, like I would recommend working with some of your technology leaders at your company to bring them into the fold, tell them what you're trying to do, maybe show them what you're trying to experiment with, and make them part of that solution with you, because it all goes back to being able to articulate the value. If you can show the leaders at your company that you can save this much time, get this better result, get this much more quality of a program or an event or whatever it may be, when you bring them into building out with you and getting there with you, you're going to go a lot further than just trying to solve it on your own. And again, like going back to the intern, you don't want to like throw something into the intern's hand that they really shouldn't be using. So don't do it alone. Bring people into the fold, and get the support that you need to start to use some of this in your work. I don't know if you have anything to add. I hope that is at least a good starting answer.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it really well. I think unfortunately at this time, it feels like no tool is secure. I think AI is less secure than other tools, but of course, with whatever you're using, if you're putting something on your computer or on the internet, there's always going to be some level of risk. Nothing is ever perfect. So I guess that's the piece I'll add on that. I agree with Richelle. As once again, I'm working more on the small business side, so we don't have necessarily a technical consultant, which I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are entrepreneurs or more on the small agency side as well. I would say, as Richelle said, avoid any personally identifiable information where you can. Once again, if it's something that's proprietary to a client, be very, very careful with that as well. Try and, if you can broaden it and still get a great result, try and do that. That's at least how I approach it. You can, of course, have it review contracts without it exposing information that might be vulnerable for a client or for you as well. So make sure that you're omitting the information that can identify people. Of course, like the biggest red flag of all time is no banking information, of course. We've already sort of heard stories of course, there being banking information online, ChatGPT, OpenAI having scraped the internet, and then that showing up in people searching for credit card information when using a tool. So, like any way that you can avoid getting it into their data set is what you want to do. So, once again, leave all of that out for sure.
Amazing. We've still got lots of questions coming in and we're almost up on time. So I think we're either going to have to do another session or at least find a way to answer some of these questions on another day, because there's some good ones in here. So I just to kind of see us out, finish us off. Spencer asked a question just around, do you see AI helping more in the planning phase or the marketing phase? And I kind of just want to add into that a third option of the kind of event experience, the attendee experience phase. Like, where do you see AI having the biggest impact now, and where do you hope to see AI having the biggest impact in kind of 6 to 12 months time?
Oh, I was just about to type an answer in the box, because I think we just don't even have like time to scratch the surface on the attendee experience. And there's so much that I wanted to share, but maybe we will do it in another session. I would just say really broadly, there's some exciting stuff using different types of AI tools, not just the like generative AI and some of the stuff we've been talking about today, but using things like computer vision, machine learning to assist with more real-time analysis of crowd flow, really cool tools that enable better accessibility for attendees, some amazing stuff around like safety, emergency readiness, and protocols. There's a ton, and like we are really at time. I would have loved to dive into each of those. But I would say in short, like tools that kind of recede into the background and are almost imperceptible to the attendees, but that are working really hard behind the scenes to make the experience that much safer, better, smoother, while empowering us as the planners to have better data, better decision making, and better like real time like eyes and coverage, that it usually takes a lot of people and a lot of coverage to do more manually. That's kind of where the sweet spot is in delivering that value for attendees. And maybe we'll get to dive more into that in a part two.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back and do a part two. I mean, there's clearly a lot of questions unanswered, and Liz has just said, please do another session. So I think, yeah, we will absolutely try to do that. But we're right up on time. And so, Richelle, Noah, I want to thank you both so much for coming in, sharing your expertise, your perspective, and really just beginning this conversation, right? As you've both mentioned today, we're at the very beginning of this. This is an evolving space. Noah, your analogy about the dot-com bubble, like, there's a lot to be uncovered as we move forward. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate you both coming in and getting the conversation started. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. And we'll follow up with the on-demand footage and everything like that and the stuff that Noah's going to share. But yeah, appreciate everyone joining us today.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you, Nathan.